My name is Isabelle Hart. Today is my high school graduation day, a milestone I once believed would be the proudest day of my life. I sat in the fourth row, the word valedictorian pinned to the front of my black gown catching the eye of a few teachers who smiled at me. Some classmates turned around to nod their congratulations. I nodded back, trying to stay composed. But there was no joy inside me, only a silent tension, like a violin string stretched to the point of snapping. The loudspeaker echoed through the hall, calling each student's name to receive their diploma. Some names earned warm applause, others were cheered as if at a football game. But when the microphone rang out, valedictorian of the class of 2024, Isabelle Hart, the entire auditorium shifted. I stood up, adjusted my gown, and began walking slowly toward the stage. For a brief moment, clapping began only to be sliced through by a voice, cold as steel, coming from the left side of the audience. "That girl is not my biological daughter." The entire hall seemed to hold its breath. "I'm officially cutting off all financial support. From today on, she's on her own." I stopped in the middle of the aisle. Every camera, every phone, every pair of eyes turned to me and to the man who had spoken those words. David Hart, the man who had raised me since I was 10 years old, after my mother passed away. He sat upright, face blank, fingers interlaced on his lap as if delivering a quarterly business report. Whispers rippled out like wildfire through dry forest. A mother gasped, hand over her mouth. A child in the front row began to cry. The principal, standing in the wings, flinched. And I, still standing in the aisle, my name echoing through the speakers, felt trapped in a distorted reality. I was supposed to cry. I was supposed to run. I was supposed to feel shattered. But I did none of those things. I smiled. Not the kind of smile you wear to hide pain or fake bravery. A real smile, the one my mother used to say could light up an entire room. I turned to look at David. His gaze faltered for a moment. Maybe he thought I'd collapse, beg, step back. But he was wrong. I walked straight toward the stage, passing the diploma table, ignoring the principal's confused glance. I didn't reach out to accept the diploma. I walked directly to the microphone at center stage. The principal stepped forward, trying to intervene, but I shook my head gently. "I need to say something," I said, my voice loud enough for the mic to catch every word. The auditorium fell completely silent. No more whispers, just people holding their breath. I looked around. Hundreds of people, classmates, parents, teachers, family. And David, the man who still believed he'd just landed the final blow. From the pocket of my graduation folder, I pulled out a sealed white envelope. I placed my hand on the microphone and said, "Since we're sharing DNA secrets, maybe I should share something too." I laid the envelope on the wooden podium, feeling my heart pounding inside my chest, but my voice remained steady and clear through the mic. "You said I'm not your biological daughter?" I turned and looked directly at David, who sat with his chin slightly raised, as if daring me to retaliate. "That's true, I found out when I was 12, when my mother Clara told me the truth, but she also told me this." I paused, letting the silence stretch, scanning the room heavy with tension. "She told me I was loved, I was wanted, and even if we didn't share blood, she never once saw me as a burden. I was her daughter. And she chose to raise me with her whole heart." David shifted slightly in his seat. Not from emotion, perhaps, but because the story was now veering off the script he had written in his mind. "But if today," I continued, "we're sharing DNA secrets, then maybe I should share one more thing." I calmly opened the envelope. The sound of paper rubbing against paper was faint, yet in the frozen stillness of the room, every movement felt loud. I pulled out a letter-sized sheet, folded in thirds, and unfolded it slowly, like revealing a secret locked away for months. "You've always been so proud of Emma," I said, voice even. "The 3-year-old with dimples and curly hair, the one you flaunt all over Facebook, Instagram, every corporate party." I glanced at Jenna, the woman sitting right beside David. The moment our eyes met, she froze. Her hand gripped the hem of her dress, lips trembling slightly. The arm holding Emma shifted downward, as if even the child had become something fragile, dangerous. I raised the paper in my hand. The thing is, Emma is not your biological daughter, David. A soft gasp came from somewhere in the back. Then the scraping of a chair. Then quickened breaths. The room burst into a wave of murmurs. Phones buzzed. A few people stood up, craning their necks to see more clearly. Jenna leaned toward David, whispering something in panic, but I didn't stop. I kept going. The evidence is right here. DNA test results between you and Emma, paternity probability. 0.0%. I looked at Jenna. And there's also a comparison sample from the biological father, none other than Alan Whitmore. Your best friend. The man you invited over for dinner every Saturday. Jenna's face had lost all color. Her eyes were wide, and she clutched the child as if it were the only shield she had left. Sorry for interrupting the ceremony, I said, lowering my voice for the first time, but some truths can't be buried forever. David sprang from his seat. You're lying, he shouted, voice hoarse. What kind of stunt is this? I didn't answer. I simply placed the paper on the podium so everyone could see the red seal of the testing center. For the past 3 months, I've gathered every DNA sample, every hotel receipt, every photograph, and even the diamond bracelet that once belonged to my mother, now sitting on Jenna's wrist. The bracelet you promised to keep safe as a family heirloom. I stepped back from the microphone. All eyes were on me, but I wasn't afraid. In fact, for the first time in my life, I felt light. David, I said one last time, you can deny me. But you can't deny the truth. Jenna jumped to her feet. She tripped on the leg of the chair, nearly falling, then scrambled to scoop Emma into her arms and rushed toward the exit. The sound of her heels hitting the wooden floor echoed like fists pounding on the door of her own conscience. The auditorium doors slammed shut behind them. David remained standing, his face pale, eyes wide, staring at me like I was someone he no longer recognized. But I just smiled. Not out of spite, not with pride. Just a simple, quiet smile. Because at last, I had spoken. And I knew this was only the beginning. I used to think losing my mother was the worst thing that could happen to a child. But I was wrong. The worst thing is growing up in a house where love no longer has a place. My mother Clara passed away when I was 14. Late-stage cancer. From diagnosis to her final breath, it was barely 8 months. I still remember the night she sat beside my bed, her hair nearly all gone, her hands trembling as she held mine and said, "If one day I'm no longer here, you must remember. You are the strongest child I've ever known. And you deserve love not because you're good at anything, but because you are you." I believed her. Until the day she closed her eyes, and the man who had once been Dad began to change. Not 6 months after the funeral, he brought a strange woman into our home and said, "This is Jenna, my girlfriend." Jenna arrived like a cold wind, not warm, not refreshing, just icy. She always wore cream blazers, her hair perfectly tied up, her smile as flat as if it were cut from a magazine cover. The first time she met me, she didn't ask how I was, didn't offer condolences. She just scanned me head to toe and said, "You're Clara's daughter, aren't you? You kind of look like her." That was it. No hug, no emotion. Just an evaluation. Soon after, they got married. A small, tight ceremony with no relatives from my mother's side, no mention of her name. I wore the same black dress I had worn to her funeral. Jenna looked at me with those frozen eyes and muttered, "You look like you're here for a funeral." The house that once smelled warmly of apple pie and my mother's vanilla now reeked of strong perfume and expensive orange essential oils. The small candles my mom used to light were replaced by motion sensor lamps. Every photo of her slowly disappeared from the living room. In their place were pictures of David and Jenna meticulously color-corrected, hanging prominently on the main wall like a silent speech declaring that the family has changed. Dinner, once the only time the three of us shared stories about school, friends, and the cartoons I loved, had become a tense meeting. Jenna sat at the head of the table. David held an iPad. I sat in the corner, like someone borrowing space at someone else's table. Whenever I tried to gain their attention, stellar report cards, a second-place speech competition, a summer scholarship, Jenna would simply smirk, "Good. But you need to improve in math." David wouldn't even look up. "Yeah, that's good." A nod. No praise, no questions, no hugs. I began spending more time in my room, teaching myself, rereading my mom's old books. Each page was a place to hide. Every note she wrote in blue ink was a silent hug I clung to. Then one day, Jenna announced, "I'm pregnant." David looked up, and for the first time in months, I saw him smile, a real smile. He took Jenna's hand and kissed her forehead. "We have a chance to start over," he said. I remember those words exactly. I was right there, next to the fridge, holding a glass of water. And no one looked at me. I didn't know what start over meant. But I knew one thing. I wasn't part of it. From that day on, I became a shadow in my own home. Jenna was cared for every meal, every nap. David made shopping lists, called designers to redo the baby's room. Meanwhile, I had to apply for scholarships myself, pay for my SAT fees with the money I made working in the school library. No one asked if I was okay. No one asked if I needed anything. They just said, "You're grown. You can handle it." But it wasn't trust. It was a way to push me aside, like an old file no longer relevant to the new family blueprint. I remember once asking David on a night he came home late, sitting silently in front of the television that wasn't even on, "Dad, do you ever miss Mom?" He didn't answer, he just stood up, poured himself a glass of whiskey, and said, "That's in the past, you need to learn how to be practical." That's when I knew this house wasn't home anymore. It was a structure rebuilt without a foundation of love. And I was just an old wall they hadn't gotten around to tearing down. I survived that house by staying silent. Enduring. I taught myself how to fix leaky pipes, how to ride the bus, how to work part-time jobs, how to write college essays at midnight because during the day, Jenna made me clean the storage room. But I never broke. I swallowed every emotion whole. And I made myself a promise, when the chance came, I wouldn't need their acceptance. Emma was born on a March morning, in a cloud of applause and pink balloons floating through the halls of a private hospital. I stood outside the nursery room, looking through the thick glass, watching David cradle her like he was holding the entire universe. He whispered something into her ear, then turned to Jenna lying in the hospital bed, beaming like a queen. In that moment, they looked like a perfect family. Except me. No one called me into the room. No one asked if I wanted to hold my baby sister. I stood there for more than 15 minutes, a small bouquet in hand, bought with my weekend library job paycheck. Then I turned and walked away. From the moment Emma arrived, everything in the house changed. My reading room was turned into the baby's nursery. My mother's old books were boxed and shoved into the basement, replaced with a changing table, a humidifier, and wooden plaques engraved with Emma's World. Suddenly, the entire universe in that home revolved around one person, and it wasn't me. David took 2 weeks off work to care for the baby. He spent hours by her crib, singing lullabies. Jenna was constantly posting pictures of their little happy family online, complete with hashtags like #blessed and me. I disappeared from every photo. I tried my hardest to still be the daughter worth loving, waking early to cook breakfast, taking the earliest bus to school, studying hard, getting straight. As in every subject, even getting selected to represent the school in the statewide speech competition. But all I ever got from Jenna was, "Don't overdo it, don't show off. You should remember who's paying for your roof." And David, he just muttered. Every time I brought up an achievement, he nodded like signing off a contract, and went back to reading the paper. No hugs, no. "I'm proud of you." Gradually, Jenna began saying things that chilled me. Never in front of others, she was always sweet, calling me our sweet little Isabelle when guests were around. But when we were alone, her tone shifted completely. "Your mother's probably glad she died early. She'd have gone mad watching you cling on like this. And let me be honest, you're like an ink stain on a white sheet. No one wants to see that." I swallowed every word. But when I saw my mother's bracelet, the silver one with the blue stone she'd worn ever since I was a child shimmering on Jenna's wrist during dinner, I couldn't take it anymore. That's when I knew. Something was wrong. Not just coldness, something deeper. The way David looked at Emma, it was too intense, too enchanted, unlike anything he'd ever shown me. And the way Jenna avoided my eyes whenever I mentioned my mother. One night, I heard her whispering on the phone downstairs, voice low but rushed. I crept quietly down the stairs. "Don't text this number anymore," Jenna whispered. "David's starting to get suspicious. You held Emma too long the other day, I had to distract him." I froze in place. Inside my mind, all the scattered puzzle pieces began clicking together. The times Alan, David's longtime best friend, came over and played with Emma a little too much. The expensive gifts from Uncle Alan. The moments when Jenna disappeared with vague excuses and returned with freshly styled hair and newly painted nails. Right then, I understood. I hadn't just been pushed out of the family. I was living inside a stage play scripted by two adults for whom I was merely a convenient supporting character. So I started planning. Every step had to be careful. No one could suspect a thing. I quietly collected strands of David's hair from his comb in the bathroom. Then one afternoon, while Emma was napping, I gently picked up a few hairs from her pillow. Alan was the easiest, he always used the downstairs bathroom when he visited. One night after a pizza dinner, I found a hair clinging to a used tissue near the sink. 3 samples, clean, precise. I placed them into small Ziploc bags and tucked them inside a book my mother once gave me. Jane Eyre, a story of another abandoned girl reclaiming her worth. I found a private lab just 3 blocks from school. Paid in cash. Lied and said it was for a genetics project. The middle-aged technician gave me a curious look, then nodded. "Your results will be ready in 3 weeks." I felt like I had crossed an invisible threshold. I was no longer the quiet, obedient Isabelle who longed to be loved. I was now the only one willing to expose the truth, not because I wanted to ruin anything, but because I couldn't live one more day inside a house built on lies. Those 3 weeks, I lived like a ghost. Jenna still performed her role as the loving mother. David remained blind. Alan kept smiling and calling me kiddo. I nodded back. I spoke politely. I even helped Jenna change Emma's diapers. But every night, as the house fell silent, I opened my laptop and reviewed recordings from my phone. I saved every photo, every hotel receipt Jenna had carelessly dropped. I sorted everything, every shred of proof, every word, every glance. And I knew. When the time was right, I wouldn't need to scream to be heard. I would only need to speak and let the truth do the rest. On Thursday afternoon, just after my shift at the school library, my phone rang. An unknown number flashed across the screen. I answered, and my heart skipped. "Hello, this is TSS Lab. Your DNA results are ready. You can pick them up anytime during business hours." I gripped the strap of my bag and nodded, even though the voice on the other end couldn't see me. "Thank you, I'll be right there." Bus number 27 carried me across the west side of the city, past the upscale boutiques Jenna frequented. My mind raced with possibilities, with doubts and what-ifs, but deep down, I already knew. I had always known. The lab was tucked between old buildings, its sign faded and barely legible. A middle-aged woman handed me a thick white envelope, sealed tightly. "Good luck," she said. I didn't open it right away. I slipped it into the pocket of my coat and walked along the edge of a nearby lake, the wind biting cold. Then, under the shadow of an old oak tree, I pulled the envelope out, took a deep breath, and peeled back each layer of paper. My eyes stopped at the bold print. Probability of biological relationship, father-child. Between David Hart and Emma Hart, 0.00%. Probability of biological relationship, father-child, between Alan Whitmore and Emma Hart, 99.98%. No surprise. But it still hurt. Not because Jenna had betrayed David, but because the very reason I had been cast out of this family revolved around a child who, in truth, didn't even belong to them either. That night, I hid the envelope in the secret compartment of my bookshelf, tucked behind Jane Eyre. No one suspected a thing. Jenna was busy planning Emma's upcoming birthday party. David came home late, celebrating the signing of a new contract. Everyone was occupied with their own version of reality. 3 days later, I overheard the conversation that sealed everything. I was heading upstairs when I caught whispers coming from the study. The door was slightly ajar. I was about to walk past, but the word Harvard stopped me cold. "You're really thinking about sending her to Harvard?" Jenna's voice rang out. David sighed. "I don't know. Isabelle's smart, but honestly, she's not my biological daughter. I've raised her for over 10 years. That should be enough." End of chapter. "Exactly," Jenna replied, her voice sweet like sugar laced with venom. "That money should be for Emma. She needs a better future. Isabelle? She's clever, she'll figure things out. You don't owe her anything anymore." I didn't listen any further. I turned back, walked slowly to my room. The bedroom window was still cracked open. I sat on the floor, hugging a pillow. What filled my chest wasn't rage, it was stillness. A dangerous stillness, the kind that settles in right before a storm hits. I thought of all the years gone by, of the mother who once called me her little flame that knew how to burn bright on her own. Of the sleepless nights spent studying alone. Of the bracelet worn by Jenna like a trophy. And of the way David had never once looked at me like I was truly his daughter. I knew I didn't need pity. I didn't even need his tuition money. I needed just one thing, the truth to be spoken, once and for all. And there was no place more fitting than graduation. I began to prepare. The DNA results were tucked neatly inside my graduation folder, right behind the speech. I once wrote a speech that was never approved, because I knew I'd never be allowed to read it. I organized all the evidence, hotel receipts, photos of Alan holding Emma at the park, and the recording of Jenna's whispered confession over the phone. Every item was numbered, printed, and sealed. Not because I wanted revenge, but because if anyone dared to doubt me after that day, I could lay everything out and simply say, "This is the truth, read it yourselves." Graduation day arrived. The sky was suspiciously perfect. I wore a black gown and a pair of old heels borrowed from a classmate. Before leaving the house, I stood in front of the mirror and tied a blue ribbon around my wrist, the color of the bracelet my mother used to wear. A silent way to bring her with me. As I stepped outside, I saw David standing next to the car, dressed in a gray suit, his expression stern, like he was heading to a board meeting. Jenna was fixing his collar, holding Emma in her arms. The little girl sucked her thumb, staring at me with wide, unblinking black eyes. "Are you ready?" David asked, without looking at me. I nodded. "I am." "Allah." I sat in the back seat, the wind slipping through the car window, curling into my lap like a strange breeze, one without fear, without waiting, with nothing left to lose. Only one thing left to say. I stepped onto the stage, my heels clicking softly against the wooden steps, echoing like the steady beat of a heart that no longer trembled. Everything slowed down. The lights cast their glow on my graduation gown, the school emblem in gold catching cold, sharp reflections. Behind me stood the principal, diploma in hand, frozen, unsure if she should intervene. In front of me, the entire auditorium, 400 people, from classmates to parents, teachers to janitors, all holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. I gripped the envelope, my fingers gliding over its edge, creased from 3 weeks of folding and unfolding. Beneath it was the red stamp, the numbers no one could deny. David was right. I began, my voice calm but carrying clearly through the microphone. I am not his biological daughter. I've known that since I was 12. My mother Clara told me one winter afternoon, when she still had enough strength to sit by the window and share with me the kind of truths that don't come easily. I glanced at the 4th row. David sat motionless, as if someone had hit pause on his entire being. His jaw clenched, hands clasped tightly together, eyes wide but blank. Beside him, Jenna was shaking her head over and over. But my mother also taught me that love doesn't always come from blood. Real love is when someone chooses to stay, chooses to hold a child who isn't theirs, and treat them as their own flesh and blood. I paused. That, my mother could do, David couldn't. Jenna shot to her feet. She clutched Emma in her arms, her hands trembling, her face drained of all color. David, let's go, she whispered, tugging at his arm, trying to get him to stand. But David didn't move. I lifted the envelope, unfolding the carefully creased paper. And since today is the day for DNA secrets to come to light, I thought maybe I should tell you one more thing. I looked directly at Jenna. The 3-year-old girl you've cradled like porcelain, she's not your biological daughter. The murmurs erupted like a tidal wave. Someone gasped. Oh my God. A boy in the back row shot up from his seat. The sound of camera shutters clicking echoed through the auditorium, phones raised in every direction. The entire room was in uproar. The proof is right here. DNA results between you and Emma. 0.00%. Jenna started to stumble backward. I could see the panic unraveling in her eyes. Emma burst into loud sobs, her cry piercing, but not enough to drown out the thunder of the truth. I also tested Alan Whitmore. I paused, letting the names strike like a slap across the room. Paternity probability, 99.98%. Cries of disbelief rang from every corner. Someone blurted, Alan, David's best friend. Another shouted, I'm recording this, oh my God. David turned to Jenna, his mouth open, as if trying to speak, but no words came out. Jenna, I called, the bracelet on your wrist, it used to belong to my mother. It was the last gift I had left from her. And you had the audacity to wear it, to show up here as if you were the only one who had the right to be called a mother. Jenna froze. I saw her hands trembling so violently that she nearly dropped Emma. I stepped forward, my voice steady. My mother is gone, but her love never betrayed anyone. The words cut like a blade. Jenna staggered back, then turned and ran for the exit. Her heels pounded against the floor like the hammer of a judge. David remained frozen in his seat, eyes wide, staring into a void where every illusion had just been shattered. The auditorium doors slammed shut. Emma's cries echoed from the other side. I turned to the principal. He was still holding the diploma, his hands shaking as he extended it toward me. Congratulations, Isabelle. I took the diploma and carefully folded it. No applause, no family photos, no congratulatory hug. And I didn't need any of it. I turned to the audience and bowed. In that moment, I saw some of the teachers nod gently. One placed a hand over her heart. A few classmates stood, eyes glistening. Not out of pity, but because they understood. I walked off the stage as if stepping out of an invisible prison I had lived in for 18 years. Behind me, I heard David call softly, Isabelle, wait. But I didn't turn back. I didn't need another explanation. I didn't need him to understand. I only needed to be free. 3 weeks after graduation, my name appeared across local newspapers and community forums. Not because I was the valedictorian, but because I was the girl who exposed the truth through DNA on stage, the one who brought down a respected family in minutes, in front of 100 eyes and hundreds of recording phones. The clip spread faster than I imagined. A small television station even requested an interview, but I declined. I didn't need fame. I only needed a life no longer dragged down by sugar-coated lies. The news hit like a hammer. Jenna vanished almost immediately after that day, taking Emma and leaving the city. She was never seen again at any community events. And the endless stream of smiling family photos on social media? Gone. A few days later, David filed for divorce. In the documents, he didn't fight for custody. The man who once preached about honor and responsibility left just one sentence at the hearing. I was betrayed. Word reached the board of directors at the company where David was CEO. An emergency meeting was called. He was asked to take an indefinite leave due to reputational concerns. Alan didn't fare much better. His wife, a gentlewoman I once called Clara No. 2, because she shared my mother's name, moved out after receiving a copy of the test results. She took their 6-year-old twin boys with her, leaving Alan alone in the massive estate he once proudly called the perfect home. The families of two men who once stood at the top, one for reputation, one for wealth, collapsed because of a single white envelope. And me? I moved into a tiny rental room near my university. The space barely fit a single bed, an old wooden desk, and a floating bookshelf. But to me, it was the first place where I could breathe without dodging judgmental stares or biting remarks. I went to classes in the morning, worked part-time at a bookstore in the afternoon, and spent my evenings writing short journal entries to my mother, words no one would ever read. But the only way I still felt she was with me. One rainy afternoon, as I was reorganizing books by theme, a knock came at the door. Slow, heavy, like each tap was weighed down by hesitation and guilt. I opened it. David stood there. No gray suit, no silk tie, just a man undone, hair disheveled, dark circles beneath his eyes aging him a decade. His shirt was wrinkled, the shoulders soaked with rain, and in his eyes was something I had never seen in him before. Regret. "May I have a few minutes?" he asked, his voice low and hoarse. I stepped aside. No words. We sat facing each other on the narrow balcony of the boarding house. The rain was still falling, soft and steady. Neither of us spoke at first. Only the sound of rain tapping the metal roof and the cold slipping into our hands. "You were right," he finally said. "I just wish I had seen it sooner." I looked at him. No anger, no pity, just silence. David bowed his head, hands clasped tightly, his back more hunched than I remembered. "When your mother was alive, she always told me to open my heart. To remember that love isn't defined by blood." I never understood. I took a deep breath. "I don't need an apology, David." He looked up. I saw a thin film of water in his eyes. "I'm not saying that to sound noble," I continued. "It's because I can't spend the rest of my life carrying resentment. I've carried it long enough. Now, I need to be free." David nodded. For the first time, it wasn't the nod of a man signing a contract, it was the quiet nod of someone finally accepting their own failure. "I'm not asking you to call me Dad. I know I don't deserve that. But, if you'll let me, I'd like to make things right through action. Maybe just meeting once a month, hearing about your classes, or even just sitting like this." I said nothing. The breeze carried the scent of rain and memories. I thought of my mother. If she were here, she'd smile and say, "You did the right thing." But forgiveness, that's how you reclaim your own heart. I nodded gently. One dinner a month, no talk about the past, just two people learning how to be family again. How it? David didn't smile, but his eyes softened. And for a fleeting moment, I saw a different version of the man who had raised me all those years, the version he might have been before pain turned him cold. I don't remember when the rain stopped. I stood up, went inside, and returned with 2 cups of hot tea, handing one to him. For the first time in a long while, no one interrupted me. No one looked down on me, no one called me a burden. We sat there, in comfortable silence. And I knew, the past could never be erased. But from this moment on, I was the one who got to write what came next. I don't call it starting over. Because some fractures never fully heal, and some voids can never be filled, no matter how hard we try. I call it beginning from a truer place. A place where there's no need to pretend love exists. No need to force myself to be a grateful child just because I was raised. I forgave David. Not because he deserved it, but because I deserved to be free. Free from the words never spoken. Free from waiting for love from someone who never knew how to give it. Free from the quiet fury that had burned through me for years. Our first dinner took place in a small diner beneath the golden canopy of late-season maple trees. David arrived on time, dressed neatly, carrying 2 old books of my mother's that he had recovered from the storage room. We didn't talk much about the past. We spoke of small things, how my favorite food had changed from pasta to grilled salmon, how I had just received a full scholarship to Columbia's literature program, how I was now learning French even though no one asked me to. He didn't judge, didn't make excuses, didn't try to fix things with fancy words, he simply listened. And at times, his eyes carried a quiet sadness, as if flipping through pages of a life he once believed he lived right. We repeated those dinners once a month. Not to stitch together a broken family, but to create a small rhythm enough for two people who had lost their way to learn again how to simply be present with each other. I moved into the dorms at the start of fall. A small room, its window opening to a campus yard dusted in red leaves. I pinned up photos of my friends, taped Maya Angelou's poems on the walls, and placed 3 things on the wooden shelf above my bed. The worn copy of Jane Eyre my mother once read to me, a copy of my Columbia scholarship letter, and a faded, yellowing photograph of me at 8 years old, sitting between my mother and David. Under the golden summer light of a year when we still believed love was something that couldn't break. I look at that photo each night before bed, not with longing, but as a quiet reminder that once, I was loved even if only briefly. And that love, even if denied, was real. On the first day of classes, I stepped into the lecture hall with a new notebook in hand and the fountain pen my mother had once gifted me. The autumn wind swept through my hair, carrying a feeling I couldn't quite name, not pure happiness, not complete peace, but something sturdier. I was no longer the 14-year-old girl standing quietly at her mother's funeral. No longer the 17-year-old hoping her father would finally see her. I was Isabelle Hart. I had survived what no one should have to endure, and I was still here, more whole than I had ever been. That night, I opened my laptop and wrote a letter to the version of myself from 1 year ago. Dear one, if you're reading this through tears, through loneliness, or through unspeakable pain, know that you won't stay there forever. One day, you will rise, you will speak the truth. You will stop fighting to be seen. Because you will understand, your worth does not live in anyone else's eyes. You deserve love. You deserve kindness. You deserve a life where you don't have to beg to be accepted. And when you understand that, you'll walk into the light without needing anyone to lead the way. I hit save, then closed the laptop. Outside the window, the rain had begun to fall. I poured a cup of tea, sat down in the old fabric chair, the soft glow of the lamp spilling across the half-open pages of my book. A new chapter of my life had begun. No applause, no name tag that says, "Good daughter." Just me. Alone, but entirely whole. I used to think revenge was the only way to end pain. That if I could make them feel shame, make the whole world see the truth, the wound inside me would finally heal. But I've come to understand. True revenge isn't about bringing anyone to their knees. It's when I move forward without needing them to see, without needing them to understand, and without needing their applause. When I stood on that stage, holding the envelope that contained the truth, my heart wasn't just pounding from rage. It was because I knew I was about to release a weight I had carried through my entire childhood. I didn't need to be biological. I didn't need to be labeled as worthy. I only needed one thing: to be myself, and to live a life no longer defined by someone else. If you've made it this far, and if you've ever been the outsider in your own family, ever sat through dinner without a single question asked, ever been called a burden, ever been treated like a shadow, please know this. You are not alone. You are not invisible. You are not wrong for hoping. And you are still worthy of love, even if they never recognize it. You may not have chosen where you came from, but you absolutely can choose where you begin again. And sometimes, starting over isn't a lonely road, it's the path that leads you to a version of yourself that is stronger, freer, and more true than you've ever known. If this story resonated with you, leave a comment. Let me know where you're watching from, because I believe those who have been hurt can recognize each other in the deepest silences. And if you know someone who needs to hear they matter, who needs to be reminded they are enough, share this video with them. Because sometimes, just one story is enough to save a dream that's about to fade. I'll see you again in the next chapter of your own life.